Good evening, everyone. So I'd like to welcome you all here tonight to our Grazing and Fertiliser Management webinar for beef. I'm your chair for tonight, Catriona Foley. I'm a dry stock advisor down in Dungarvan. So it's probably the worst night of the year for us doing this tonight with all the rain, but I'm sure we all know that the rain has to stop and we have to have a plan. And the earlier you have that plan, the more you'll get out of it. So just to tell you who we're going to have here tonight, we'll have Terry Carroll. He's a dry stock advisor in Kilkenny, and he'll be talking with Dara Walton, a Suckler-to-Beef farmer from Callan. We also have Mark Plunkett, our signpost training and development specialist, who will be talking about soil and nutrition. So I'll hand over to our first speakers now, Terry Carroll and Dara Walton.
Very much, Catriona, for that introduction. Terry Carroll, dry stock advisor, Kilkenny, and I'm delighted to have Suckler client of mine, Dara Walton from Callan. How are you, Darren? Are you hearing me loud and clear?
I can hear you, yeah, Terry. No bother.
Great, thanks, Dara. So look, I suppose, as Catriona says, that the webinar is on the whole area of, nutrients out in the springtime, and we're talking about slurry and bagged fertilizer, and obviously cattle turnout. So they're the things we want to concentrate on from now till about maybe early mid-April. So look, Dara, you're farming out in Callan. I've been out on your farm several times. I suppose it could be described as maybe mixed soil type, some heavy ground down the back and maybe a little bit lighter soil up the front. But do you want to just give us a flavour of what your farm is and your enterprises that you carry?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure. Look, I'm a full-time beef farmer. I'm a single labour unit farm. Farming about 140 acres, made up of mixture of grazing ground, and I have a lease block up the road in for silage. I carry around 60 continental bred suckler cows, and then I complement them with between 60 and 65 dairy bred heifers that I buy from in the rudder every year. So the aim is to have about 120 weanlings at the end of every year. They're going into the shed.
Great. I think if that up on a slide for us there as well, that we can just see those figures. That slide appears up. Yeah. So that's it. Around about the 140 acres, 58 hectares, all grass and fairly fresh ground, I think, Dara, too, there. You've done a lot of reseeding over the years.
Yeah, I'd be reseeding every year. Last year now we did 10 acres there, near enough to the house. And it's a continuous cycle the whole time. When you're carrying a high stocking rate, you have to be able to grow the grass. And the only way you can keep growing good grass is to keep the paddocks fresh and the grass good in them there. So yeah, so I'll be using.
And I know with the sucklers, yeah, you were going to the factory with some of the cattle. I think of late you've been getting such good prices there as stores in that sort of June, July period that nearly the suckler stock go that route now, and obviously the dairy calves that you buy, you take them to beef. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, that would be it. Yeah, I suppose the reduction in derogation probably forced my hand a little bit there. I had to look at things that we couldn't keep carrying all the cattle to beef. So I suppose put more emphasis on getting the continental cattle out a bit earlier and pushing them hard, getting weight on them and selling them as stores. So I actually haven't looked back since I started going into that system, selling the quality cattle as stores. And I bring all the dairy bred cattle in, I bring them to beef, then put them into the shed.
Very good. And I say you are a fairly heavily stocked farm. I think you're up around 207 or something kilos of organic again last year. So, a lot of mouths there for grass in the spring. So it's absolutely paramount that, you get that grass moving. And I'm saying about 70% of the farm heavy. I might contradict me now, I'm not sure. All reseeded, you're strong into clover, about 2 kilos per acre in all the mixes, and just flicking through your soils there, we're nearly perfect for lime. I did notice some low P fields there. I think that's mainly that lease ground that you're only into the last year or two, and maybe 25% low in K. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, the lease ground is low, trying hard to get it up. And then the majority of my farm before I took it on would have been traditionally the silage field. So like there were big crops of silage being taken off them. and we're just trying hard to get the P's and K's up, and not easy. I suppose you're looking at costs too, and you're spreading fertilizer, and you're trying to balance everything as well, you know.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. No, so look, and as Katrina said, obviously it's a horrendous day, but thank God it's still January. So, we're now near the end of January, and look, I can remember January the last few weeks would have been very, very wet, even though I think the first 10 days were nice. So it's still early regardless, I suppose, getting out slurry or bag fertilizer, or obviously cattle, and very little of either of those three are probably gone out. But just maybe like, what are your plans for February, if and when this weather and soil dries up? And I know you have a few points down on a second slide. You can talk through his as well there.
yeah, well, I'd normally get in the contractor there in February with the pipes. I'm just busy with calf and everything like that, and I just let him at it and get probably 20 to 30 acres done with about 2,500 gallons of slurry. They'd be the paddocks that would probably be grazed last in the rotation there. They'd be the lightest covers, probably paddocks that would have grazed late, so the last that were closed up, say, at the back end of the year. So I'll be looking to get something out on them to kind of get him kicked on a bit. And I suppose then you'd like to get out grazing then after that there, I suppose, and follow on with slurry.
Yeah, yeah. And then for obviously we calculated your story there back a week ago when we were just out having a quick chat. I think we're making out you're around about 245 or 250,000 gallons will be produced during the winter. So I suppose that's one thing that we'd be always emphasizing with farmers, like you need to have a slurry plan and know what slurry you have and have an allocation in your head worked out there or on a piece of paper. And while we want to get slurry and silage ground, you tend to normally go after the first cut of silage you were saying to me there. You want to just comment on that?
Yeah, well, the silage ground, it's only a kilometre away as the crow flies, but it's different ground. It's slower in the spring and it doesn't dry out as quick. And if I like to get up and graze in the springtime, and if I'm late coming down off it, I just want to get bag fertilizer on it. And as I was saying, like, I'm a single labour unit, so I spread most of the slurry myself. So it's just another job that I don't have to do. It's just quicker, get up, get the fertilizer out on it, and then I'll come on then after the first cut and spread the slurry on it. And if I had slurry left over, I'll go up again after the second cut and empty out all the tanks on it. I mean, that's kind of what I've done for the last couple of years.
Yeah, yeah. So your first 3 points there, it's slurry. Really, February is nearly the slurry month with you, and it's probably March before you're going into bag fertilizer. Is that a fair way of summing it up?
Yeah. I'd like to get out and graze. See, the heavier covers on the farm now, I'd get them all grazed off. Follow them then with 2,500 gallons of slurry with the dribble bar. I do that myself. And then and that got slurry there in early February. Then we top it up then with roughly about 30 units of urea, 35 units of urea there probably in March, and have that round in ready to go for grazing then I suppose towards the end of the March. And I suppose the same way we'd nearly top up, and that got slurry would be topped up with 35 units of urea. And any ground I didn't reach with slurry, then I'd try and get to it then with about 36, 2 bags, or 36 or 40 units of 18,612. And so I'm getting a bit of P and K out and getting nitrogen out there as well there on those other field paddocks.
Yeah, yeah. And look, at while your slurry is your main fertilizer, I suppose, in February, what we'd be saying, there'll be plenty of farmers that will be using bag fertilizer, and that's 100% perfect. And probably from look, if weather and soil were right, we'd be probably encouraging people with good ryegrass swards anytime from early February there, where you have a lot of mouths and you want to grow grass. You're probably going out with that 20 units plus of urea at that stage, pro urea, to move grass on. In your case, instead of that, you're substituting it with your slurry. I suppose we're saying 2,500 gallons of dribble bar slurry is probably 21 or 2 units of nitrogen, and obviously you have to be a P and K with it as well. Just you have up there on the top your fertilizer choices. Yeah, you're obviously a pro urea person for the last few years. Any comments on how well it's working for you?
It works fine. I don't see, I've no complaints against it anyway. Yeah. It's Yeah, I find it good. Yeah, yeah. No lanes as I've been using the Pro here for the last couple of years since it became an option, and yeah, happy enough with it.
Yeah. And it's probably you use the 46, maybe without the sulfur early on, but largely then you'll be into the bit of sulfur there, possibly from April or May onwards there to give you a little boost.
Yeah. The first round would be just straight pro urea, and then we'd go with the sulfur then after that. I find I do get a good response on my own farm from it, and the silage ground would also get the 38% with sulfur on it as well there, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think most farmers have, converted over to that now. It's nearly like, absolutely don't make sure you have sulfur going on your silage ground or you're just leaving yield behind you. So look, that's a good idea of the sort of plans you have. And obviously the best plans in the world go out the window. Weather and soil conditions will dictate when you're going anything. But I suppose on to cattle then, I mean, what cattle type or numbers do you out first to grass, and sort of what plan are you following, not to run out of grass, I suppose, by April, as you are a fairly heavily stocked farm?
Um, I suppose on my farm, my cows and calves are my priority. They graze all the ground that's nearest to the farmyard, and that would be the driest ground I'd have. So they go to grass, I suppose 5 to 6 days old, but they go by day. I have good roadways, good infrastructure. I say my cows come back into a cubicle shed, so it makes doing that kind of thing a bit easier than if they were going into slatted pens, for example. So I can just open the gate and run them back in. I want to get them out, get grass into them by day. I allocate a block to them back in at night, out by day. I do that for about a fortnight. I'd usually have about 20 cows, maybe calf there fairly tightly, and then if the weather is kind and they're given a good week, a frosty week or something like that, I might leave them out by night, and I'd be bringing out another group then, starting a second group, and I'd be also grazing them by day and getting them acclimatized to grazing and getting grass back in their system, and they'd be priority, and I would put a fiber source with the cows as well, maybe with a round feeder on the roadway now, to just to keep things right. But we'd say when you'd have 20 cows out, I if the weather was iffy, I'd move them twice a day. I'd move them in the morning, move again in the evening time, and you're allocating then kind of depends on the covers. I'd probably go out and graze lighter covers first, and you can get through a bit more ground, and then you're acclimatizing your cows, I suppose, back to grazing, and then we'd move in on heavier covers then, that when they are a good appetite for grass, then you get in and allocate then maybe an acre a day or that kind of thing. And I'd mix it up and go by how well they're cleaning out the paddocks there in the evening time. And then I suppose I have a good bundle of dairy stock there, and dairy heifers. So I'd try and get out, 20 to 25 of them in early February. I pick out the lightest ones, and if I can get them out, I put them down maybe on the lower part of the farm. They won't do any damage, and getting them out early, then they'll have that head start on the heavier ones. And usually by the time the heavier ones come out, the lighter ones have caught up, and you have a very even group of weanings going together. And I suppose the third group then would be my bull and heifers. I try to get them out as well, and just get them acclimatized to grazing, and hopefully when they're out that bit earlier, then that they'll start thinking about cycling, and I can get them in calf, and start serving them there towards the end of April there.
Very good.
So,
And I know you just put that down on a spring rotation planner there, what you do every year. I think if that on the final slide. And again, it's a guideline there. So I suppose we never tell people maybe how many cattle let out or whatever. But if you have a sort of plan like this here, it'll regulate yourself that come the 10th or 12th of April, when you'd like to think you're starting the second rotation, that you have not run out. So do you want to just talk us quickly through that one there, Dara? I think the 11th of February is the plan, about a fortnight away.
yeah, like,
As of today, it won't be the 11th of February, but things do change.
no, so it's like Armageddon out there. But I try to graze. I try to graze every opportunity I can. Like I won't, if the weather's bad, I'll go back in. I won't damage the farm, but at the same time, I'll try and graze. Um, you see, if I'm kind of behind myself on the planner, we'll just go out down to a few lower covers nip them off, and then you're kind of back up to where you want to be. Likewise, if you're getting into March and you haven't enough grass eating, well, I've plenty of cattle in the shed, I can lay them out, and then you can get yourself back up to speed. Like, because if I go ahead of myself, we're going to get a week in March where it's just the weather's going to be awful and everything's going to be back in again. So that'll correct itself. Like, I'm very flexible. Like, as I said,
Yeah.
the gate will open both ways. I can open it to let him out, and I can also open it and push him back in and keep things
Very good.
right.
Very good. Yeah, so that's just a slide there. It's just a sort of a typical plan. It just sort of regulates or polices yourself then when you're going about that thing that if February came very good, or end of February, early March, and you got a rake of cattle out, just to be careful that we don't run out. So it's sort of a little self-policing planner we do give to farmers. So look, I think at this stage, Catriona, we'll hand back to yourself. And if there's any question or two, we can take it before you head on to Mark Plunkett.
Yeah, I should have said there at the beginning, we've got the question and answers tab there at the bottom of your screen if anyone wants to type in a question. One question we have there is, just 1 second there. How often do you soil sample, Dara?
I think every 3 or 4 years. So you have to do them for derogation. So I sampled everything last January. The whole farm was done. So they're very up to date soil samples that I have there now at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, so they'll last for 4 years. So he's on a plan there, a rotational sort of sampling plan, Catriona, yeah.
And then just another question, and maybe this one is for you, Terry, if Dara doesn't do it. Have you ever tested slurry, and is it a good job?
I haven't tested the slurry, no.
Yeah.
Terry?
So I suppose, look at, and I know Mark Plunkett's coming on shortly, and he'd be an expert now. We've my dairy colleagues and I had a couple of beef farmers we tested there about 2 years ago, got it analysed. The standard figure, I suppose, we have from 1,000 gallons of cattle slurry that's has been agitated and water added and ready to be spread with a dribble bar is typically 9, 5, 32. 9 units N, 5 units P, and 32 units of K. That time we tested, I know, I can remember the beef farmer I had in it, he would have been feeding a lot of meal to heifers, so it was high quality slurry, and the P was about 7 units and the K was up probably over 50 units. So the K was higher than what we were estimating, but a typical average of average quality slurry compared to, say, someone intensively feeding cattle will be higher, around about that 9, 5, 32 per 1,000 gallons, put a value on it about €30 a 1,000 gallons, a super valuable asset. And that's why Dara is allocating it so carefully, because it's very, very valuable.
Yeah, good to know what you have. So Mark, you're ready to go there, are you?
I am, Catriona, yeah.
Perfect. So we'll hand over to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Catriona. Thanks, Terry, for inviting me along here tonight. Tonight, folks, I'm going to talk very much, the title of my presentation is around planning nutrient applications for dry stock farms. So again, I suppose for the world that we live in today, fertilizer is very, very expensive. It's about definitely double as expensive as it was before the fertilizer crisis back in 2021, 2022. And again, for the road that we're heading in terms of sustainability, reducing emissions, improving water quality, improving biodiversity, that I suppose every effort that we can make to, I suppose, increase the efficiency or how we utilize those nutrients, whether it's growing grass or building soil fertility or saving on fertilizer costs, is now is a great time to take stock of that. So Catriona, what I'm going to do, I'm going to touch a little bit on soil fertility on dry stock farms, both nationally and Kilkenny. I'll look at lime and the role it has to play in modern farming systems. I'll also look at grass growth and grass nutrient demands. I'll build on what Terry and Dara have spoke about just around spring nitrogen and timing of application. We'll touch a little bit on slurry, and I'll finish up then with a little bit on fertilizer programs for both grazing ground and silage fields. So look, as I was saying, look, I suppose it is a great time of the year. I know it's probably one of the worst weeks we've had here in the southeast of Ireland for the amount of rain that we've got. We're probably we haven't had as much rain, I'd say, in the last 50 years as in a single event as we've had in the last week, and it's having a big impact out there on everybody. But hopefully, that will go, and things can only get better. So again, planning nutrient applications, I'm going to focus around, lime, organic manures and fertilizers. So again, I suppose, look there, in terms of improving nitrogen use efficiency, getting the most out of these nutrients, and reducing losses both to air and water. Like lime, like we're spreading about 1 million tons of lime currently, and we need about another 500,000 tons. And I reckon it's on the dry stock farms. That's where we need to spread the lime in this country. Also, organic manures, a very, very valuable source of NP and K. I'll touch on that, and then fertilizers. Again, as regards getting the best return on investment from bag nitrogen and the likes of your 18612. So I suppose, look, in terms of nationally, in terms of soil fertility, you can see there, this is all the dry stock samples taken in Teagasc. We take about, somewhere in the region of about 40,000 dry stock samples per year. And you can see there's 62% of soils that need lime. So nationally, there's a big, big lime requirement out there on dry stock farms. And it's probably the #1 nutrient that we need to correct as we speak. And again, we'll pay big, big benefits there. In terms of P's and K's, and again, especially the phosphorus, like we can see over 61% of soils are deficient or short of phosphorus. Again, a key nutrient in terms of grass production and animal health, and potash about 50%. So again, look, for me, if we got the pH right, we would see an instant improvement in both P and K on dry stock farms, which is critical in terms of grass growth. In terms of optimum soil fertility, so again, if we're to see what percentage of soils nationally are optimum for growing grass, only 13%, and there's 80% suboptimal. So that's a serious limitation or the grass production on dry stock farms as we speak. So from just getting the basics right in terms of soil fertility, we can grow, another 10, 15, 20% more grass on dry stock farms. If we look a little bit closer to home here in Kilkenny, things are slightly better. In terms of pH, we still have work to do. There's still 38% of soils are below the optimum pH of 6.3 on mineral soils in terms of grass production. And again, the P's and K's are slightly better, but still there's approximately a third of soils there. 37% of soils index 1 and 2 for P and K, and 36% of soils index 1 and 2 for K. So again, I firmly believe that, again, especially on the soils that you have in Kilkenny and Waterford there, that by getting the pH right, again, you'll move a lot of these soils out of index 1 into index 2, and out of index 2 and into index 3. And again, basically that is going to drive grass production on those farms. So again, in terms of optimum soil fertility in Kilkenny is slightly better. 25% of the soils are optimum for PK and lime, but still there's 75% of soils that are limited in terms of one of the major nutrients, whether it's lime, P or K. So that's the limiting factor that's limiting grass production down there in Kilkenny. And again, you are on some of the best soils in the country down there. So by just getting the basics right, you can switch on those soils in terms of grass production and animal health. So I suppose, look, why lime? So again, look, as I say, you're in a good county there. You have some of the best quality lime in the country. You have two excellent quarries there in terms of lime. But again, what can you do by getting the pH right? Again, I'm saying it's the foundation in terms of grass production, productivity. We can grow an extra 1 to 2 tons of dry matter per hectare per year. So again, you can grow an extra 10, 15, 20% more grass from, I suppose, a good value product in terms of lime, and that's driving nitrogen use efficiency on the farm. Where is that nitrogen coming from? The first one, you have more active soil. So biological activity is basically switched on. It's like turning on the light, going into a room. You get the earthworms, the bugs, the bacteria, functioning, working in that soil. So again, those soils, just to give you an idea, you can, soils can supply anywhere between 70 to 220 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. So again, your soils will grow grass, and down there in Kilkenny, I'd imagine, those soils will supply probably 140, 150 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. That will come from having the pH right. Do you know what I mean? So you'll grow probably 4 or 5 tons of dry matter, for free, basically, from the soil's natural reserves of supply of nitrogen, but that's been mineralized by increasing the pH or increasing the biological activity of the soil. The other one in terms of the soil phosphorus, so as I was saying to you, by getting the pH right up to that 6.3, you increase the supply of phosphorus from the soil. So again, you know, the biology, the activity, you know, you could move an index there from getting the pH right on those soils, and that's driving the extra grass production. The other thing to keep in mind as well, that, you know, there's valuable nutrients in our slurry. You know, there's probably somewhere between 10 to 15 kilos of nitrogen per hectare coming from the slurry on an annual basis. And again, by getting the pH right, you know, you mineralize, you make that nitrogen available, you increase the efficiency of the utilization of that nitrogen that's in your slurry. And then bag fertilizer. So again, fertilizer is expensive. So again, we're trying to increase the efficiency of that nitrogen from our bag fertilizer. And again, Dara is working clover in the system there. So again, you know what I mean? By getting the pH right, you're looking at a higher pH for clover swards and a higher P and K. So, you know, you need to get the productivity and the establishment from your clovers, your white clovers, your red clovers. You know, you need that good soil fertility, that foundation, in terms of, you know, establishment, and then getting the productivity or the production out of that clover sward. And again, look, big benefits there. You know, for where we're heading today in this world, you know, there's so much uncertainty. You know, we're a little island, you know, out in the Atlantic. All the fertilizer has to come on a boat. And again, if we can get more clover into the system, we can basically have a fertilizer factory on our farm. So again, we are reducing our reliance on that boat coming, you know, to Ireland at an unknown cost. And again, fertilizer will only get more expensive, folks, as we head, you know, into 2030, 2035, you know, between taxes and trade tariffs. Fertilizer, especially nitrogen fertilizers and P's and K's, are going to get more expensive. So we have to be trying to, I suppose, get the basics right to improve the resilience of our soils, of our systems, that were less dependable, you know, on that imported chemical fertilizer. So look, you know, something very basic, and again, it's been preached for a long number of years now. But like, you know, in terms of nutrient availability and supply, like lime is the key nutrient. And again, you are on the road there in Kilkenny, you know, you are ahead of the national average, but still we can do more in terms of getting the pH right. And again, if we take ground here that's low in pH, low in P and K, by getting the pH right, we can improve the nitrogen use efficiency from 35 to 51% efficiency. So that's a 16% improvement in nitrogen use efficiency from lime alone. So lime is the heavy lifter in terms of improving the productivity or the supply of nitrogen from your soil. You know, if I'm getting the P and K right, you know, you can go to about 63%, you know, nutrient use efficiency. So you get about another 12% improvement in the NUE, or the efficiency of the nitrogen that you know, we apply as slurry, as fertilizers. And also don't forget that the soils will supply nitrogen themselves as well. But again, you know, big message here tonight for me is that lime is key, you know, for the road that we're on, in terms of, you know, maintaining productivity, and in terms of improving the sustainability of our farming systems. So in terms of the return on investment, like from getting the pH up from 5.5 up to 6.3 on the whole farm, we can grow about an extra 1.5 tons of dry matter per hectare per year. So this is just coming from getting the pH right, from getting, you know, getting your pHs, you know, from acidic into that neutral, that sweet spot there, that 6.3 to 6.5. And again, if we put a value on that, you know, for in terms of return on investment, you're getting, you know, for every euro spent on lime, you're getting 4.50 back in extra grass production. So again, that's, you know, that's a massive return on investment. You know, in terms of investing money, or in terms of your farm, your soils, you know, the payback is big here. You spend €1,000 on lime and you get 4,500 euros back in extra grass production, you know, in terms of better quality silage, you know, better animal performance, etc. So again, lime, number one in terms of, let's make it number one for 2026 and getting our pHs right. Okay, Terry asked me to talk about, I suppose, the whole area of, I suppose, you know, when do we go with that early nitrogen, or when do we back the tractor into the slurry tanker or the fertilizer spreader? You know, when should we be getting out there, as Dara is, with slurry or with bag fertilizer? So again, if we just look at, I suppose, the factors that drive grass growth, and the big ones there is solar radiation. So like the grass plant is like a solar panel. So basically it needs sunlight. That's the energy, you know, it needs light intensity. That's what drives, plant growth, production. And again, look, I just put in the number of hours of sunshine that we get there, in the different months. January about 2 hours, February 2.5 hours, March 4 hours, April 5 to 6 hours per day. So again, the more sunshine we have, the more energy we have to drive plant growth, and then the plant is calling for more nutrient, more nitrogen, more P and K. And again, we're trying to supply that nutrient as the days get longer and the plant wakes up or kicks off in terms of grass growth. Another big thing that maybe you think before, if I was to ask you the question, like, what's the key factor in terms of grass growth? We probably think of soil temperature. And yes, it's very, very important. But with climate change, like, our soils are probably warmer over the winter period. You know what I mean? That we're getting less frost, less snow. So you could say that's a benefit of climate change. But then why don't we grow a lot of grass? We do grow grass in the winter months, but like, light is the limiting factor really in the winter. The short days, um, the dark evenings, like. But again, look, in terms of soil temperatures, they're getting close. Like, this is the latest soil temperature map there on the right hand side. You can see in Johnstown Castle around 6 degrees, Oak Park 5 degrees, Moore Park around 5. So again, soil temperatures are increasing, but we'd like to have soils somewhere around 6 degrees, greater than 6 degrees, in terms of substantial grass growth. Moisture, there's no limit in terms of moisture as we speak. Soils are saturated, they're above field capacity, they're not trafficable, as we speak, because of the rain. But moisture tends not to be a problem. But I suppose as we move into March, when you get those dry, hardy, cold days, we often can get conditions that are, I suppose, drying, and probably not so much a limitation as regards growth, maybe more effects in terms of, if you have bare surface and spreading spreading nitrogen under those harsh cold conditions. So look, for me, like, I suppose one of the big ones is day length, solar radiation, soil temperatures, and then moisture tends not to be a limiting factor. I suppose the other big thing as well, in terms of the night, that we're talking about grass growth, but soil fertility is key as well. And again, we must have soil fertility right, as we're saying. And again, in terms of yield response, and again, I just put down some of the yield responses there. In terms of pH, we can grow an extra 1 to 2 tons of dry matter per hectare per year. Getting the P and K right up to that, that top of index 2 into index 3, we can grow an extra 2 tons of dry matter. And then sulfur, you know what I mean, again, is a limiting nutrient. And like, we're seeing yield responses up to 2.5 tons of dry matter per hectare from the application of sulfur. And again, we're seeing a response across a range of soil types, not only the lighter soils, but also on the heavier soils as well. So again, I suppose, look, just to maybe draw you in there in terms of using the nitrogen more efficiently. So again, I just have 2 different soil types here. The green is a free draining soil, and the red line is a heavier soil. So this is the grass growth pattern, or during the growing season. So again, I suppose the risky windows in terms of nutrient loss tend to be on the shoulders of the year. So in the springtime and the autumn. So these are the times that we lose, especially nitrogen, either through leaching, on a light soil. There'll be a lot of leaching going on at the moment, and also denitrification. With waterlogged soils, we get, with lack of oxygen, we get denitrification, and the nitrogen gets pushed off as mainly N2 gas, into the atmosphere, and it's lost to the system, or volatilization. If you get those drying conditions, as we're talking about, often encountered in the month of March. But I suppose, look, what I'm saying to you here tonight, folks, is that we're trying to get, the majority of our nutrient applications, whether it's slurry or fertilizer, into the more efficient window, anywhere from March, I suppose, into July, August. That's the most efficient time that the grass is growing very rapidly. There's a big demand for especially nitrogen and all on the other major nutrients. So we're trying to increase the efficiency of that nutrient. So again, I suppose, look, just to give you an idea when we grow the grass. So again, and in terms of nutrient efficiency. So at this time of the year, we only grow about 10% of the grass up until, I suppose, the first, second, third week of March. Okay, about a ton of dry matter. But the nitrogen is only about 30% efficient. So for every 10 kilos of nitrogen we apply, we only utilize 3 kilos. So again, as I say, we're trying to get the nitrogen into the most efficient time of the year, when we grow the most grass. And again, you can see the efficiencies there, anywhere from Paddy's Day, in up until, I suppose, mid June, you're looking at about an 85% efficiency of that nitrogen. So again, that's when we grow the most grass. That's when the biggest demand for the nutrient is there. Okay, so again, I just have broken it down. At the moment, like, if you look at grass growth rates, there's, grass is growing at about 7 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. If you turn that into for a month, we're growing about 0.2 of about 0.2 of a ton of dry matter as we speak. As we move on further into February, about 0.3 of a ton, and then into, I suppose, the first 2 weeks of March, about half a ton. So that's that ton of dry matter that I talked about. That's what we're growing up until about Paddy's Day. And again, look, the demand there is around 25 kilos of nitrogen. And again, we'd be recommending there, a protected urea, it's the most efficient, the most stable form of nitrogen to go out in that early window. So once conditions improve, we're probably talking the second, third week of February, you probably should be thinking about getting some level of nitrogen out there. And again, that could go out as slurry either, as Dara is doing there. If Dara's putting out 2,500 gallons of slurry, will give you about 25 kilos of nitrogen per hectare as well. So we're thinking about the grazing ground here. And again, then you can see grass growth really kicks off then as the days get longer, more light as we move into April. You're looking at about 1.3 tons of dry matter. So again, we're growing somewhere, 2.5 tons of dry matter in that first 4 months of the year. And again, for the second round, it's the first round that Dara's putting out there. We'd be recommending something like an 18,612 with sulfur there for that second round. And again, it tends to be the best time to get the phosphorus out in terms of driving grass growth. On the silage ground then, look, it's a little bit different. We'd be encouraging to put the slurry out in that first round, or it could be going out in the second round, like Dara's doing, depending on the soils or the ground conditions. But again, yes, we'll be trying to get the slurry back onto the silage ground in terms of recycling those major nutrients and also recovering a proportion of nitrogen to grow that silage crop as well. So again, look, just a little bit on slurry. Again, ideally targeted to the low index fields. Use low emission slurry technology, your trailing shoe, your band spreader to maximize the recovery of nitrogen. Slurry testing, yes, definitely is a good job. You know the value of the slurry, a bit like buying a bag of fertilizer, you know what's in it, and you target the slurry then to the different parts of the farm where that nutrient demand is. Again, we're trying to get the slurry out in the springtime, to maximize the recovery of that nitrogen. And again, look, I'm saying here, ideally, in the ideal world, you'd like to get all the slurry back to the silage fields. In terms of the nitrogen value there, whether you think kilos per cubic meter, but there's 1 kilo of available nitrogen per cubic meter or 9 units per 1,000 gallons of good quality cattle slurry. Where should you spread your slurry? Again, ideally back to the silage ground. That's where it's come from, because again, there's a lot of K in that slurry, and that's where it needs to go back to keep the farm, P and K nutrients in balance there. Again, Terry has given you figures there for, probably on the dry stock side of the house beef farms, you're probably looking at the heavier slurries. So again, a 6% slurry there is something like a 9,532, a 7% is like a 10,636. So again, a very, very valuable source of nutrients on dry stock farms, and we're trying to utilize it as best we can. So in terms of silage ground there, again, Terry is touching on it there as well. So again, a typical fertilizer program on silage ground, again in terms of replacing offtake, something like 3,000 gallons of good quality cattle slurry, and again topped up then of 1.4 bags of something like a 38 plus 7 with sulfur there would be a very, very good program in terms of your first cut silage there. In terms of the grazing ground, there's I suppose again the offtakes in terms of, for the different stocking rates, anywhere from a bag of 18,612 up to 2 bags of 18,612 will cover the majority of the P and K requirements on the grazing area. 18,612 is the product of choice. We'd be encouraging you to go with 18,612 in the second or third round, depending on the soil type. The lighter soils, go in the second round, on the heavier soils go in the third round. But again, you'll not beat 18,612. It has the right balance of P's and K's with a good form of nitrogen, and also get some sulfur out there as well in terms of, improving that nitrogen use efficiency. So again, I suppose, look, in terms of driving the efficient use of nutrients, especially nitrogen on dry stock farms, number one, the foundation is lime. get the lime right. You know, get your pHs up to 6.3 to 6.5, and you go higher if you want to get clover in 6.5 to 6.8. Again, improve soil fertility, and lime will bring a proportion of improvement, especially to the P and the K. You know, by getting the pHs right, the research would show us that. You know, fertilizer use efficiency. You know, you can use the fertilizer very, very efficiently then. So again, we're putting the fertilizer out, you know, when those conditions are right in terms of soil conditions, you know, as the days are getting longer, and conditions are good. Also make best use of the slurry. Use the slurry as efficiently. You know, treat it the same as bank fertilizer. It's a very, very valuable source of nutrients, and then adjust your fertilizer applications, like adjust your nitrogen applications, you know, where you have improved the pH, you've improved the P and K, and adjusted for the nitrogen that's in the slurry. So I'll leave it there, and we can take any questions then, Catriona and Terry. Okay.
Perfect, Mark. Thanks very much for that. Some simple but important messages, really, as lime as the driver for nitrogen use efficiency.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Sorry, Catriona.
okay. Yeah. And sure, I've one question in for Dara, and we might give you a breather for a few seconds, Mark.
Okay. Yeah.
Dara, do you ever get slurry on the silage before you cut the first cut?
It's a few years now since I have done that. As I said, it's heavy ground and it's very weather dependent up there. To try and get to it. And if it runs late by the time it dries out on me, I just rather get the bagged fertilizer on it and get the grass growing, and then come back on it. Then we'll say with the slurry there after the first cut. It really come down. The weather dictate an awful lot with a lot of my ground, but as I said, when I'm on my own and try to spread slurry myself, and there's other jobs, and just to make sure I keep on target with my silage cutting, oftentimes it's just easier to get out with the bag fertilizer.
Yeah, perfect.
I think once that slurry is going back to the silage ground, Catriona, that's very, very important. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, once you're getting, especially, we don't think about carbon. Like, we generally think about NP and K for growing grass, but carbon is also very, very important, or organic matter. So what you know, what Dara is doing, getting that slurry, it's a vital nutrient in terms of, I suppose, sustaining the productivity of the silage swards. You know what I mean? Keeping the ryegrasses in it, and also, like, you know, you get extra yield from getting that slurry back to the silage fields as well.
Perfect. And now a question for you, Mark. Please outline the time gaps that should be left between lime, slurry, and urea, and the correct order.
Well, with protected urea, there's no issue. There's no issue with protected urea, so you can spread lime and protected urea together. So there's no issue there. So that sort of eliminates the whole issues with urea as we had in the past. For slurry, ideally spread the slurry first and give it a week, and then come with the lime.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And what's the maximum kg of potash, 50% K, that should be spread per application?
I suppose it depends. On grazing ground, I'm very much on just in springtime put out a maintenance. So put out your, I suppose, depending on your stocking rate, maybe 20, 25 units per acre. So it'll be roughly a half a bag of muriate in the spring. On silage ground, we generally talk about 70 units, 70, 80 units of potash max. So again, on your silage ground, you're talking sort of a bag and a half of muriate potash.
Right. And next one, does slurry containing silage effluent have a higher proportion of nitrogen? Last year, after spreading effluent on first cut silage ground, the grass showed high levels of nitrogen for a long time.
Yeah, possibly so. I don't know, Terry, have you any experience with silage effluent? But it's probably a very rich source of nutrients. I'm guessing, like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose like with slurry, the more water you have the slurry, and obviously definitely to have it more runny, you're getting a better kick of nitrogen from that slurry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's certainly something you notice where it does spread. It does go very green, very fast. Next question, is there a difference in calcium and magnesium lime?
I suppose you're fortunate in Kilkenny is that you have both quarries there side by side in Bennett's Bridge. For me, the calcium lime is like a sprinter. It works faster. It's a quicker lime. So if you wanted to get if you had very low pHs and you wanted to get a quick lift, calcium lime is very, very, very good. Magnesium lime, I suppose, if your soils are low in magnesium, or it tends to be more like a sprinter. It's a slower lime to work. And often the place that I often recommended, Terry, is maybe where you've high molybdenum soils. You know what I mean? That you don't get that that it doesn't go to the pH doesn't rise as quick. So you know what I mean? Yet it may not aggravate a copper deficiency as quickly. You know, that's if you have an issue with molybdenum on your farm. But yeah, I suppose it depends on the situation, Catriona.
I suppose, Catriona, just to add on top of that, the starting point for all this, and we had a discussion group today, and we were saying it, have accurate soil tests. And I mean, there's not too many opportune times in the year to take soil samples because you'll have fertilizers and slurry out. But this is a super time. We're saying really around Christmas or into early January, before maybe nutrients have gone out, take your soil samples. I mean, none of us, no matter how good or bad we are walking out in the field, will be able to tell what sort of lime is needed on a field. You have to have an accurate soil test, and we're emphasizing that with people now. It's still a super opportunity. Get soil tests if you haven't them done in the last couple of years, and we can go through them with you and have a plan.
And more questions coming in here now. Why is sulfur so important, and what sulfur is in 1,000 gallons of slurry?
There's very little sulfur in 1,000 gallons of slurry, Catriona. There's something like a unit per 1,000 gallons. A lot of it's unavailable. It's in the organic
Very low.
matter. What was the second part of that question, Catriona?
So, why is sulfur so important?
It drives nitrogen use efficiency. Like we're finding, say, where you have an all fertilizer program, you're reducing nitrate leaching by about 22 kilos per hectare per year, and in a silage situation, you're reducing nitrate leaching by about 50 kilos, where you have optimal levels of sulfur. So again, sulfur very, very important. You don't need too much sulfur, but you just need enough sulfur. Very, very important in terms of driving that utilization of nitrogen in the grass plant.
I'm often told if you spread slurry in February versus urea, the grass growth is better. Is this true?
Yeah, look, it's back to slurry. It's a very valuable source of NPK, as I says, carbon. So you're giving the grass a feed. You know what I mean? You're giving it a broad feed of nutrients. So again, if you're on sort of soils that are deficient in P and K, or carbon, there's a benefit there than just going to the straight nitrogen.
Yeah, you're giving it more food.
Exactly, yeah.
Is there a yield advantage to applying slurry to silage ground above chemical fertilizer?
Yes, we're seeing about 1.5 tons of dry matter per hectare above straight chemical fertilizer, and it's purely coming from the carbon, the organic matter in silage fields. So you're growing about another 10, 15, 20% more grass by getting the slurry back onto the silage fields.
Okay. And is protected urea cheaper?
Yes,
Cheaper than what now? I'm not sure, but
well, if you compare it to CAN, currently it's about 15 or 16% cheaper per kilo of nitrogen compared to say CAN. Yeah.
Okay. And what about values for farmyard manure, or is it considered minimal?
No, farmyard manure it's about 10 or a ton, I think 10, 12 euros a ton. Again, very, very valuable source of organic matter or soil carbon and P's and K's. Yeah, it's an excellent. It's probably the premier organic manure out there on Irish farms.
Can you spread too much sulfur?
You can, yeah. You can overdo the sulfur. As I say, we recommend about 15 kilos per hectare on grazing fields and about 10 to 20 kilos per hectare on silage fields.
Okay, and I suppose for my own curiosity, what happens when you do overdo it in the sulfur?
You tend to run into problems with selenium and trace elements. You know what I mean? You can get an imbalance, especially with the micronutrients. So again, a little and often, and don't over apply. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I used a dribble bar last year and it left lines on the grass. Will that cause a problem to animal health?
Generally shouldn't cause a problem. But all I can say again, I suppose just watch the conditions around the timing of slurry again. You know what I mean? If you can get rain either before or after when you spread the slurry, and maybe diluting the slurry would help alleviate the problem as well, like, you know.
And is pig slurry as beneficial to ground as cattle slurry?
Yes, pig slurry is an excellent source of NP and K. It's probably a better balance of, especially the P and K. Like 1,000 gallons of pig slurry is probably something like a 19,720. So again, you know, 2.5, 3,000 gallons, you know, would do a super job on silage ground and will give you more nitrogen. There's probably double the nitrogen in pig slurry compared to cattle slurry. Yeah, so pig slurry is a super organic manure. Yeah.
And Terry, this one may be for you. Is it better to spread fertiliser before spraying for docks? And if so, how long should you wait between spreading the fertiliser and spraying the docks?
Well, I suppose spraying docks, you know, you're spending big money on a spray there, and maybe a sprayer person. So you want to have the docks at the right growth stage and growing. So, you know, whether fertilizer goes out beforehand or after, I don't think that's the main thing. Once the dock is actively grown and the leaf is of the right size for the spray, it shouldn't matter whether you put fertilizer before or after. You won't be going out to spray docks in very drying weather and not much growth. It's not a great recipe for getting the spray to move down into that non-growing plant. So, you know, I wouldn't mind when you go out with that fertilizer. We're looking at the spraying job here and actively growing and at proper stage. The dock is the most important thing, more than the fertilizer.
And another one for you, Terry. What's the cost of a soil sample?
Look, it varies around the country, Katrina. Anywhere I'd say from 17 or 18 euro sample up to maybe 27 or 8 euro. We have a person that goes out and does the soil sample, so we're up maybe at the higher end there. And look, at some farmers are delighted with that because they know to get the job done, and if they ring up, it could be done the next day. So look, you can go wherever co-ops or labs and get cores yourself, or come to us there and we'll have someone out to you very quick. And just remember, the rules have changed with soil tests now, that you have to send away LIPIS numbers with them wherever you're going, if you're doing them yourself or whatever. So that's just made it a little bit more complicated, but that's the rule from now on. Otherwise, the soil sample means nothing if you haven't a LIPIS number to match it up. And the soil sample can obviously be only for a max of 12 acres, any soil sample, ideally probably 8 or 10 acres.
Is taking soil tests in the wet weather a bad idea?
Look, I've done it in wet weather. It's hard enough to work the core in wet weather. And I know walking some fields today, I mean, there's water splashing up. So you mightn't be just running out today to do soil samples. You try and let the ground dry out a little bit to make life a bit easier as such for working the core. But otherwise, look, I think the most important thing is that, you know, take soil samples as far away from maybe influences like slurry or dung or fertilizer. And that tends to be sort of December, January. After that, you're maybe less room for getting an accurate sample. We're all talking about an accurate sample.
Yeah, so it can be done, but just hard work.
Well, just a
And
bit trickier, yeah.
yeah, if I dilute my slurry a lot with water, does it reduce the P and the K a lot?
Should I leave that to
Yeah,
Mark? He's the
yeah,
expert.
it will, like, you know what I mean. You know, say if you're back to a 4% slurry, something like a 6,320, like, you know what I mean. So yeah, I suppose that would be the benefit of getting it tested, but and you would want to be adjusting the rates. And as Terry was saying earlier, like, you do increase the efficiency of the nitrogen. Yeah, you improve the efficiency of the nitrogen, but yeah, you are spreading less P and K. So just keep that in mind. Yeah.
Where and how long does it take to get a slurry test, and how much does it cost, if anyone knows the answer to that?
Yeah, well, look, it's costing about 70 to 80 euro a sample. We were getting them done there down at FBA lab in Cappoquin, and I'm sure there are other labs doing it. So that's about the cost, maybe 80 odd euro. I think it's a litre or 2 litre bottle. Yes, and now look at the golden rule with, you know, if you're sampling your slurry, be very, very careful doing it. So, I mean, ideally, you'll have your slurry, the water added, agitated, and really you should be taking that sample out of the back of your slurry tanker, not trying to get it out of the slurry tank itself. So out of the vacuum tanker, trying to get your sample, and don't be going near the tank where there's huge health and safety risks.
We've another question there on sulfur, Mark. I might just get you. You've kind of given this answer already, but someone has asked, what is too much sulfur?
Too much sulfur. Like we generally recommend, you know, somewhere between 10 and 15 units per acre. Like I'd imagine if I'd imagine if you're heading up maybe 25, 30 units, you could be starting to, you know, cause problems. I suppose it depends on the soils and the trace elements and things. But look, yeah, I say a little and often, you know, 10, 15 units is loads. Like, you know what I mean? That, you know, to get the big benefit in terms of growing that extra grass, like, you know.
And how many units of nitrogen in a bag of 46 protected urea?
There's 46 units, so yeah, 46 units. It's you know, compared to say 27 units in a bag of can or a bag of say pasture sward. Yeah, so 46 units in the bag, a 50-kilo bag.
And this question I don't understand. Are there issues with the spreading of hires with stripes? Would that be, not sure what they're asking there now. I might ask that person to retype that message if, next message, will there be a tariff on fertilizer this year?
There is talks of a tax or a carbon and CBAM tax, but there is indications that it may be relaxed for 2026. I think there is a meeting in Europe on Thursday, so we should know more after that meeting. But any of the urea that will be in the country at the moment, you know, wouldn't have incurred that tax that would have come in before Christmas. But probably in the years ahead, there more than likely will be a tax on all fertilizers. You know, any fertilizers come from outside of the EU. But I say there is talks or negotiations going on as we speak in terms of a relaxation of that carbon tax on fertilizers.
I'm spreading about 2,000 gallons of pig slurry to grazing ground soon. What fertilizer should I follow up with?
As I was saying, pig slurry is something like a 19,720, so that's like a 13,620. You know, so again, depending on your soil fertility, like in terms of maintenance, Terry, that probably would be loads. Like it'd be like 2 bags of, you know, 19,720. So like, you know, if you're sort of the top of index 2, index 3, you probably just need nitrogen and sulfur thereafter. I'm
Absolutely,
guessing,
yeah.
Terry.
Yeah, no, I'd go with that. Like that's you have to have very valuable product there. You have your P and K, most likely box ticked, and it's just nitrogen then for growing the grass.
Can you over apply potassium and nitrogen in the spring?
You can definitely over apply potassium, like, you know, on the grazing ground, you can cause issues in terms of, you know, animal health, and on the silage ground as well, you can over apply. So again, I suppose it's the benefit of having up-to-date soil samples and even knowing what's in your slurry, having your slurry tested, and targeting that slurry to the fields that have the biggest demand, for especially K, in the springtime.
Does importing slurry increase the risk of a nitrates inspection? Terry, do you want to take that one?
No, I don't think so. Look, there's plenty of important slurry going on. The whole thing is to do it correctly. The exporter has to notify the department within 4 days of doing it, and the importer then has a little bit more generous of a window for taking it in. Any slurries that you're importing now in this first half of the year up to the end of June, you have to accept it by the 14th of July, and slurries taken from July to December, the importer has to accept it online by the 14th of January. No, I wouldn't say that necessitates any higher chance of an inspection at all.
Dara, I have 2 questions for you now, if you can turn your mic on.
Okay, yeah.
So, Dara, have you noticed an increase in P and K after applying all the lime? Increase in P and K. I suppose maybe is that in your soil tests? If the pH was good and
I wouldn't say I can see a physical difference in it. I suppose I apply lime at reseeding time. That's when I put it out. And as I suppose on those reseeded paddock, you're putting out a good shot of P and K. Like it's going to take ages for P and K to start building in your farm anyway. Like because you're using up the P
so
and
much?
K that's there to grow grass. So it's a case of, I'd say what I'm spreading is only probably maintaining what I have there already. Ideally I'd like to be spreading more to build, but these sort of things cost money, so it's weighing it up. Like, but I can't
Yeah.
really give that a definitive answer.
No, that's okay. And another one for you. When do you soil test, before reseed or after ploughing?
Well, I just soil test every 4 years. Do the
Okay, so
entire
you're
farm in one shot,
in
like
one go.
so.
Yeah, you're not going
Yeah,
around doing an individual field just because you're
I
reseeding
know,
it.
no, get it in, go out and get it done. That's it, like, and then you have you have a whole profile then for the whole farm, like.
Yeah. And now, Mark, we're back to you. How do you suggest addressing trace element issues on soil samples, i.e. boron and other elements?
Yeah, I suppose in grassland, we probably don't see a big response in terms of grass growth. It's probably more the animal. Like boron is probably more, for me, probably more to do with crops or cereals. But I'd be, I suppose, treating the animal. Whether it's minerals or that'd be probably, that'd be the way I would go. You can apply trace elements to soils through fertilizers, but I think I would focus on the animal, Katrina. That'd be my first port of call, I think, in terms of, whether it's copper or selenium or whatever the trace element may be, that you're seeing, like.
Yeah. And then, is there an issue with protected urea and striping so that it's not spreading evenly?
I suppose there is, I suppose, extra setting up on the fertilizer spreader. So again, once you're getting a good quality product in terms of the protected urea, and then setting the fertilizer spreader up correctly to ensure that you're getting an even spread, in terms of vein settings, etc., would need to be, I suppose, considered before spreading.
And our last question then of the night, Terry, are there any risks associated with importing pig slurry?
No, look, I am not an expert in all pig diseases or whatever, but look, I have a number of clients there that would import pig slurry. Some getting it spread direct, others getting it into their tank. I've not heard of any problems there. I suppose one thing with spreading pig slurry, it's a fairly, as Mark said, it's a rich source of N in particular, as well as P and K. And you go with pig slurry in dry weather there, you could actually burn grass there. There's not to do with anything wrong with the pig slurry. It's just so rich there. So I suppose, light applications and maybe not in very dry weather would be probably the best advice, certainly when you're spreading pig slurry.
And then the one risk I just think myself is that everyone has an allocation that they are allowed to bring into the place. So you need your figures done correctly for that to make sure you don't go over that allocation, or else you could draw trouble on yourselves. All right. So it's very important to get your figures done before you import any slurry, whether it is pig or cattle. That's all our questions then in for tonight. Mark, any key final messages before we sign off?
Yeah, look, I suppose I just try to, in 2026, let's make best use of all nutrients. Let's treat slurry the same as bag fertilizer. And I know it's tricky out there on the ground, but if we can get it out, when grass growth kicks off, and trying to match that, nutrient supply with nutrient demand out in the field, to maximize, grass growth, productivity, and reduce nutrient losses during the growing season.
Perfect. And so we're just gone over the 9 o'clock mark now, so we'll sign off there. I'd like to thank the audience for all their questions. We went from 0 to a heap of them in a very short space of time. I'd like to thank all our guest speakers as well. Dara, for sharing your farm information. It was great to see some real life farm data. Mark Plunkett and Terry, thanks very much to you all. And we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, good night, folks.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.